Yeah, so we're super excited to be here. Um, we thought we would kind of, for this talk, try to be really helpful and practical about how PMs and engineers are using AI and LLMs in their day-to-day. But first, some introductions. Madeleine, you want to start?
Yeah, I'm Madeleine. I'm founder and CEO of Alma. We are a Series A startup helping teams tackle the blizzard of work that's coming at us each day. So, our product enables companies to deploy AI more effectively throughout the organization. Our product helps teams do everything from set up to manage and foster collaboration around how teams are using AI to power their day-to-day work. So, we've started with a prompt management tool that has real-time prompt refining, storing, sharing, and discovery so that teams can easily use AI to run prompts in any of their work tools from Slack to the browser, and then very quickly edit the prompts and the output and crowdsource prompts with your teams. You can run and store sessions across all different types of daily use cases.
And I'm Wenyu. I am the founder CEO of Arbot, and we're a knowledge management software currently focused on helping companies store all their documentation and standard operating procedures so that can be used to train new employees, retrain existing employees, and also be a data set for any bots that they want to make. Before that, I was the head of product at a company called Copy AI, and then before that, I was the first growth hire at a company called Point. All right, so we wanted to kind of start by giving some examples of ways that people are using AI, and we kind of broke these into two separate use cases. So first thing we'll be covering today is there's a whole class of tasks that you can think of as helping with all the mundane, busy work of your life at work. And then separately, Madeleine will talk about a whole other type category, which is more creative, more deep work. Once we cover those, we'll go over like a framework for how to prompt engineer, and then some limitations to remember as you guys are working with this, and we'll end with a note on where like this might impact organizations. But the first thing I thought I would do is I would start by playing a quick little video, and there won't be audio with it, but you guys will get the point. So I think many of you have seen something like this before, but this is just going to be an example of someone using ChatGPT for a task at work. So basically it's taking some document stored elsewhere, putting all of that information in a regular text file, and he's just copy pasting that into ChatGPT. Copy pasting a pretty straightforward instruction. And you can see what it's doing there. So I don't think this is that surprising, right? I think by now we've all kind of seen what the technology is capable of. But I thought that was a good point, a good entry point into thinking about the types of tasks that AI can help with when it comes to busy work. So I think the simplest way to think about it is when all of the information to accomplish the task exists, like when all of the information is there, when you can put it all in the prompt, when that is the case, you can kind of perform a lot of routine functions on that data. And this is different from cases where you may need to add or find more information, which Madeleine will talk about. But in these cases, you can think of several functions. One is extraction. So you could think of this as auto-populating forms, or if you have a lot of help documents and a user has a question, there's probably a part of the information in there that's relevant for the user. So extraction. Then there's also summarization. So this is, let's say you have a large number of user feedback stored somewhere, or you have a lot of tickets and you need to kind of synthesize those. It's pretty good out of the box at doing that. And then of course, meeting notes and action items, you could give it a transcript from like a call and ask it to format it a certain way. So for summarization, it's useful to think about it as, oh, all the information is still there generally, but now we're just kind of condensing it or summarizing it in some way. In the last category, I like to think of as translating or formatting. And you can think of this as kind of just changing the linguistic syntax or the linguistic style in some way. So there's a lot of products out there right now where you can kind of enter bullet points about your company, enter bullet points about your sales prospect, and it will auto write the cold email for you. In that case, crucially, the bullet points are already there, so the data is already there. You're just kind of changing how the information is represented. Um, Another great example is like any kind of natural language to SQL conversion tool. And I don't know how many of you use Copilot, but a couple engineers that I work with have mentioned that sometimes like they'll just write the comment, which is in the form of natural language, and the code will sometimes be auto-suggested for them. So yeah, generally I would think of this as there's a lot of mundane routine tasks that are highly repetitive that the information is there already. And that's something that AI can kind of work pretty good wonders with, similar to like just filling out Mad Libs. And we don't have time to go over all of the other examples, but I just wanted to quickly show a list, if you want to take a glance, of so many other tasks that fall into this category of automating busy work. Madeleine?
Yeah, thanks, Wenyu. So I'm going to walk through the other big bucket of work that we're seeing used with AI, and that's brainstorming and creative deep work. So ideation, decision making, learning. And when using AI as an ideation partner, the expectation is augmentation. So leveraging GPT as a partner to enhance the output of creative deep work, but not replace it. So the human brain is still very much involved in creating this work. I'll walk through some common categories we're seeing under the umbrella of creative deep work. And the first is around decision making. And what's great is AI is an objective third party. And so it can be very useful in helping us navigate decisions as a true triangulation partner. You can turn to AI to surface trade-offs. So have the technology force a list of pros and cons. You can have it present counter arguments. So helping you invert the decision and come to it from the other side. If two people are disagreeing, GPT can arbitrate and objectively mediate the disagreement. And then also it can guardrail egos. As humans, we all have egos. It's nearly impossible to see ourselves objectively. And we can turn to this technology to help surface and identify biases and assumptions and have us be more aware of them and come at these decisions more objectively. And then to give a very real life example, last week I turned to GPT to help me work through a product roadmap prioritization decision. And so one of the things I'm focused on is increasing activation of Alma's Slack product. And I need to solve for deepening usage and engagement. So I turned to GPT to help me decide which of two prior product features to prioritize. And I actually can share my screen and show how it went. So I prompted it around this dilemma and challenge I was facing. And very quickly, GPT surfaced and analyzed the pros and cons across the two product features I was considering. It listed them out very clearly, supported some of my thinking, it reframed some of my thinking, it inverted some of my thinking. And it helped me see things really laid out clearly and objectively. And kind of once I got that initial output, I could then refine it. So I could ask it for counter arguments. I could ask it to build on certain ones of the pros and cons and really leverage it as a triangulation partner. So then the second category that we're seeing, and we can go back to the slides, is around brainstorming. So using AI as a companion to create and augment content. So you can brainstorm full-blown written documents, from PRDs to strategy docs to compiling engineering standards to running product campaigns and blog posts, and really use GPT to get a first draft built out that you can then take and refine. And it can suggest things you wouldn't necessarily have thought about. So a new way of approaching a line of code, a new idea for a product campaign, a new way of reframing a section of your strategy doc. You can also use it then to troubleshoot. So to debug code as a QA partner, to identify security vulnerabilities. You can use it to write content in different programming languages. And what's cool is GPT-4 is a visual model, so you can even take sketches and wireframes and create full-blown websites and designs off of them. And then the final category is using AI as a way of learning about a new subject. So you can use it like Stack Overflow. I need to figure out a new API. It's almost like a masterclass learning experience. If I need to figure out how to launch a new product successfully, I can have it teach me best practices. If I need to figure out how to design something, I can turn to it. If I need to learn a new programming language, if I need to learn a new language writ large. And really the possibilities here across these different categories are endless. There are many more examples of different use cases that we haven't touched on and that we don't have time to, but these are generally speaking the broad categories of using AI as a creative, deep thinking partner. So now I'll walk through a very practical framework that you can use to build and refine prompts using GPT with your work. It's worth noting, crafting prompts takes thought and effort to build a prompt relative to what you're trying to achieve. So the more that you can build this muscle up, the easier it will become. And generally speaking, the approach is not about nailing specific language nuances. It's much more about problem solving. So coming at prompt creation and refinement from this perspective of problem solving, and starting by really defining the goal of why you're using AI in the first place for whatever it is that you're using at work. And really starting by scoping out what is the core problem for GPT to solve here. And underneath that, defining a role and clear set of expectations for GPT. So literally assigning it a role. You can say, you are an AI product manager who is an expert in prioritizing roadmap functionality. And then subsequent to that, start shaping the parameters of how you want GPT to respond with output. So you can define the voice and the tone of your desired output. You can define the intended audience who's going to ultimately receive the output. You can feed GPT very specific context about the work that you're doing and the use case. You can give it stylistic parameters, bullet points, word limits. I want this to be an email. And you can feed it examples of past work output. So right off the bat, the output matches your style, your voice, and your intended substance. So once you get that initial output, now you're entering this state of refinement where you're going back and forth with GPT, probably editing the prompt to get the output closer to your desired end state. And so in the world of problem solving, again, coming at this exercise from problem diagnosis and solutioning. So starting by identifying based on that original output, where are the different gaps and opportunities to really refine what you're seeing on the output? If there are multiple places that you want to refine based on the output, break down each one of those into their own problems. So you might have multiple subsets that you're then going back and refining with GPT. So for example, if you're using it to generate a product requirements doc, maybe you're breaking down each section of that output and tackling it one by one across overview, risks, core functionality, et cetera. And then be very specific about what you want changed, as specific as possible. Another technique during refinement is working to reframe problems. So to reframe, you can take the audience's perspective and feed it to GPT. You can use analogy or descriptions to represent the problem in different ways. You can use abstraction. And then you can also play around with different design constraints. So you can add or subtract text limits or context or goal and outcome criteria and other guardrails. And if you're doing summarization or analysis use cases, so the first bucket that Wenyu talked through, you might want to actually add constraints and really helpfully focus in and narrow in the output. For creative work, you might find yourself wanting to remove constraints and really open the aperture of what's possible. So zooming out, really coming at prompt building and refinement for work with this problem-solving mentality and really leaning into the experimental puzzle solving, trying out different things, and then keep track of what you're learning and your insights so that you can compound your ability to use the technology going forward.
So there's obviously a lot that's powerful with AI, and it has a lot of what I consider well-deserved hype right now. But I do think it is important to. This wouldn't be a complete talk if we didn't address some of the limitations of using ChatGPT and other LLMs. Um, hallucination, for those of you that don't know, it's just a term of art that means when the large language models, when they make up something that's not correct or doesn't exist. I think the best example of this, maybe some of you have seen this in the news, but there was a lawyer who was a personal injury lawyer representing a client that was suing an airline, and the lawyer made a legal filing where like all of the precedent, all the cases that it referenced were just totally made up, and like the other side couldn't find these cases in the literature, and the judge eventually had to be like, wait, what's going on here? Eventually they realized that the lawyer used ChatGPT to generate the legal brief. So that's a pretty good example of what hallucination is. One thing to keep in mind is some people would say that for some use cases, hallucination is a feature, not a bug. So if you're doing creative work and if you're brainstorming, you kind of want it to give you multiple perspectives and ideas, and just because that helps like you brainstorm along with it. But there are many use cases where you would not want it to hallucinate ever. And some of the most common techniques for preventing hallucination is one, using some type of like classifier that says, hey, don't talk about this topic. Or two, using a retrieval model. So when you first going into like a knowledge base and saying, here's the information that's relevant, and then giving that to ChatGPT and say, hey, use this information. So that way there isn't just like a blank space where it's making things up. Yeah, but again, I would think that right now most people would say this is a long tail problem. It's definitely like it's hard to imagine a future right now that where this like goes away, but the extent that you can mitigate it and work with it is the extent that you can unlock different use cases. The second kind of limitation is data privacy, and I think there's two categories of this. One is PII, like in a lot of industries, you're dealing with people's personal information, where that's heavily regulated, and a lot of companies may not want or may not be allowed to send that information to external LLMs. The second category is proprietary information. So if you're a company with a lot of um, knowledge and sensitive information you wouldn't want leaking out into the world, and you're trying to use LLMs for some type of internal use case, that's also something definitely to consider. And again, I would mention here that a lot of this depends on like the company's legal policy and where they stand. And there's a lot of API providers that say like, hey, we won't use the data to train our models if it comes from this source or this API, and you can opt out and things like that. So definitely, I think is up to the company's policy. The last thing I'll note is that we're relatively early in um, this age of kind of like new functionality driven by these LLMs. And so we're seeing a lot of large incumbents releasing new features and kind of packaging in new functionality into their existing UX workflows. We're also seeing startups kind of try to tackle on the challenge of rebuilding the workflow from end to end. But for a lot of people right now, kind of the workflows are not really ideal. And Madeleine will talk about this later as well. But there's a lot of like copy pasting. Like for my daily work, I work between these multiple apps. So like this data is stored here. I'm copy pasting from ChatGPT into this other app. And so that's also that's also a challenge, right? Because if the whole point of this is to kind of save us time in our day to days, but it requires us to create a lot of workarounds in our workflows, then the juice may not be worth the squeeze. So that's something else to keep in mind. But I think this is one that's definitely be solved with time by both existing companies and upstarts. Um, so we've talked a lot about kind of the use cases for how individuals have used uh, LLMs. Um, and how one might do so. But we thought it'd be good to talk about where do organizations as a whole go, because I think there's kind of the second order to this, where the way that people as groups work together change. And there's two topics that we feel passionate about, and these are areas in which we have our respective startups. Um, the the one I'll tackle is knowledge management. I think that basically you saw this kind of explosion of these chat with your docs applications and products and use cases. I think what we're realizing is the power of like documents and the power of wikis. When the data is stored somewhere, it is now really easy for us to kind of just take that data and use it in other contexts. I think that means two things. I think that documents, wikis, wherever information is stored, there's going to be much more leverage on that. You can kind of turn that into a chatbot or use that to power other AI applications. And the second part of that, I think, is we'll see more and more people actually need to manage their internal documentation or external documentation more carefully, like thinking of it as, oh, this is the data set that powers some AI functionality downstream. There's also another whole area where these transformers have really enabled better search as well. So I don't know how often you folks at work and it's like, hey, I can't find that report from 3 weeks ago, or a new hire is like, wait, what's the HR software that to do this thing that I need to do? There's a lot of disparate information and a lot of silos in the workplace. And actually, kind of AI-powered search, where you just have one magic bar and you can kind of get whatever information is relevant for your work. And if you imagine that for a whole organization, that's also something that's really exciting. And the last thing I'll say is that if you think about ChatGPT, one of the biggest applications of it is actually education, like students, and probably a lot of plagiarism as well. But it kind of shows that there's this kind of natural ability to use it for like working with new knowledge in education. I think that for a business, it's only a matter of time where we see that adopted more and more, where if you think about all the cases where education has to occur within a business, you have a new hire that you need to onboard, or you need to properly communicate something across different teams. I think you're also going to see these LLMs used more and more for training and education within businesses as well. Madeleine?
Sweet, thanks. I'll tackle the workflow piece in terms of how we can use AI effectively across the organization. So, as Wenyu mentioned, a few limitations right now include the fact that AI at work is quite siloed. It's very individually focused. I could be using this technology and have no idea that others on my team are using it. And it's also pretty disjointed from our actual way of working. So the real power that I foresee in terms of AI at work is when we can use this technology more collaboratively and more integrated with our day-to-day workflows and alongside our team. And there are a few key elements I see to moving to this world that I'll touch on here in terms of what we can expect to see going forward, and then how we're thinking about some of these things at Alma. So the first is around better embedding. So really being able to use AI seamlessly at work. And to achieve this, the technology needs to work with your existing workflow and across your many different SaaS applications that you're using throughout the day. So we can expect to see much more integrations. We can, across the different tools, we can see, legacy companies building AI into their products, as well as new AI companies building deep AI workflows end to end for certain use cases. And then alongside this, just a better way to run and refine prompts at work. So GPT doesn't have a great editor interface today. So expect to see different ways of being able to more easily run and then edit prompts and outputs in your workflows so that you can make changes easily and see how they're changing things. And then once you've nailed that prompt and output, better ways to actually improve and store your prompts so that if you're going to keep using them repetitively at work, you have an easy way to access what you've already learned and figured out. And then second, being able to use AI collaboratively across the organization. So using the technology and being able to crowdsource what you're learning across teams and harness what others are learning as well. So think being able to share and discover different prompts, different use cases, different ways people have implemented different AI technologies across teams, the ability to let us all learn from each other much faster and really build this collective muscle on using this technology across the company. This will also allow companies to establish more consistent practices and philosophies for how they want to deploy AI at work today. Today, it's very Wild West. It's kind of everyone doing their own thing. And so being able to actually harness those practices and philosophies and develop their way of working as a company. And then collaboration. So a world where you can actually collaborate on work using GPT. So if we're building out engineering standards and best practices as a team, we'd be able to work together simultaneously in the same prompts, in the same output, in the same docs using the technology. And then finally, this notion of developing more context retention and memory through time for how we're working and how we're using AI to do so. So applying the concept of agents, so with goals and memory to work. And imagine a world where, each time you go in, you pick up you have and are able to pick up the last session, and it has all of the context, all the prompts, the output, etc. Kind of these different experts that are able to guide you through the different elements of your workday. So my API expert, my engineering standards expert, my PRD expert, in a way that remembers prior queries, lets me refresh memory, explains things in context, and is also trained up on the company's data and my way of working. So it's quite personalized to me and my team. And you could see through time too, with functional calling, these experts actually being able to do tasks for work across tools on our behalf. Those are just a few of the different ways. I can actually show a little preview of how we've started to bring some of these elements together with Alma. So I have up on my screen, we can switch over. Sweet. So first off, just being able to run prompts across different work tools, whether that's conversations in Slack or content in the browser, any of your web-based tools, being able to highlight information, data, context, and then run it through a prompt. And then once you get that output, being, again, very easily able to edit the prompt, see how it's changing the output, and play with different parameters from default tone to audience, feeding in examples, feeding in references of different work artifacts and context of your work, and then ultimately being able to also version control and save these prompts as you're making them better and better with each session, and being able to crowdsource them with your team so then everyone can discover what other people are learning through using the tool and the technology. So lots of exciting things on the front, and Alma itself, we're still early on in the product, so we have a lot to learn and discover through building alongside our early users and also being a part of the exciting developments that we'll see with this technology and applications of AI across an organization for day-to-day work.
All right, let me see. Are we back on my screen? Yeah, we are. Great. Cool. So that's pretty much our presentation to kind of put it in the package of some takeaways. One, there's this category of use cases which is about reducing the busy work in our lives and kind of taking care of simple information-related tasks. And this works really well out of the box with LLMs, but when kind of the data is there, right? When you have a transcript and you need to summarize it, or when you have something that you need to reformat. Then there's using AI as a companion for higher level tasks. This is kind of using it as a brainstorming partner, using it to help you think through something, but you're still the person that's kind of being augmented and thinking better. And when you're working with prompts, really it's about problem solving and iterating with that to kind of almost, actually it's kind of interesting, the same way how you would coach a person to ask to think about the problem in a different way. And there definitely are still limitations to keep in mind when you're applying it to different use cases that include hallucination, data privacy, and also workflows. But overall, we're pretty excited for what this means for our work and where organizations can go. So that's it. That's our presentation. Thank you all very much. I think we have time for some questions. One quick ask is, we're both early stage founders, so any help that we can get is really appreciated. So we're looking for folks who are interested in participating in user research or getting early access for either of our products. So there's a link in the chat. It's a simple Google form. And if you're interested in talking with Madeleine or I later for user research or early access, just fill out the form that's in that link. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right.
Aaron, you're muted.
Oh, it would help if I unmute myself. This is what happens. I was so excited about it. I'm like, Madeleine, I'm so excited about your tool. I've got it bookmarked. And I went and got myself inverted. That's what happens. But very excited about the tool you've got. Thank you so much for the presentation. We've got a few questions here from the audience. And so first off, Jimmy Reichley, again, I've only messed with GPT as a normal end user and haven't saved or reused prompts across time. I've got a lot of focus on that being a primary use case in the business applications. How stable has the platform been for that? And how often do saved prompts or prompt strategies need to be redefined?
Sure, I can take this one. So I think if you identify that you have a use case that you're probably going to do more than once for your work, I think it's worth investing some time up front and actually building that prompt and then saving it somewhere. It doesn't have to be fancy until the Alma product's out. It can literally be a notes app, but just having it somewhere so it's easy for you to reference and you're able to pick up on the work that you've already done in terms of approaching building that prompt. So I would say, again, nail down kind of the goal of it, the use case, the role, and your basic parameters. And I wouldn't expect those to change each time you use that prompt all that much. So if you've defined a prompt for, writing a certain flavor of customer email, and you have your voice defined, you have the role defined, you have the intended audience defined in that context, in that formatting, you'll probably keep those pretty standard each session. And then what you're changing when you run that prompt is really the specific details of that customer communication. So you might be feeding in a specific reference. Maybe there's a news article about your customer that came out that you want it to reference in the communication. Maybe there's a specific example or specific detail about a product launch that you want it to reference. And that will be the tweaking and the refining you'll be doing for that use case.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. And I think we've got a great follow-up question. It's like y'all in the chat here are coordinating across different time zones and space and all that good stuff. But Matt asks, how often do you see a prompt drift, or the cases in which a prompt used to work, but then it stops working and you're like, crap, need to go dig that up again?
Yeah, I can take that. I think that organizations that I talk to that use LLMs for some production feature, for them, ongoing testing is pretty much like standard. So if you're using it, if it's like you're using it for a personal use case every now and then, like obviously when you notice, you'll just like work with the prompt and fix it then. But drift does happen, and the solution to that, what a lot of companies do, is just have test cases that they make sure to maintain over time.